everybody, welcome back to another episode of Dialing In, and carrying on with even more Firmware 3.15 features. We're going to take a look at a very cool delay that the fine folks at Line 6 have included with this. It wasn't one of the first things I checked out when I first received the 3.15 update, but after kind of going through all the features and checking these out a little closer, I found this is a very cool delay, and that is the CrissCross Delay. What is the CrissCross Delay? Well, it's basically a dual delay, and some folks might say, well, we already have a dual delay in the Helix. Why do we need another one? But this one is unique in that the two delay lines feed into one another. So you can get some very interesting, cool effects that are far beyond what the dual delay can do. So without further ado, let's jump over to HXEdit and take a look and see what this delay can do. All right, so here we are over in HXEdit. You'll see I have a little preset set up here with the placator dirty into a 412 greenback 25, 121 ribbon, 3 inches back. My normal little template I use, a little LA Studio comp at the end, just low and high cuts with the EQ, a little bit of room reverb, dab a low and high shelf. And I have two presets set up, one with the CrissCross delay, one with the dual delay that we've had in the Helix for some time. And I have two snapshots set up, the dual delay, which will activate just the dual delay, and the CrissCross snapshot 1, which will deactivate the dual delay and activate the CrissCross. And also it's worth mentioning that when I'm on the dual delay, the CrissCross is deactivated. So we're just going to hear one another because I want to be able to compare these to each other so you can see the similarities between the two of them. But first of all, let's go over to the CrissCross and take a look and see what we have. Well, here's all the controls we have. So we have note sync A, note sync B. Well, if we go over to the dual delay, you'll notice we have left note sync and right note sync, right? And if we turn those onto the milliseconds, it'll be right time and left time. Much like on the CrissCross, I would go time A and time B. Now, you'll notice the dual delay that we've had on the Helix talks in terms of left and right. Now, there's a reason for that because it has one of these delay lines panned left and one panned right. And the reason this is named different in the CrissCross is that they actually give us pan controls down here. So we can decide how we want these panned. We could have them both straight up the center. We could have them a little bit to the left or right. We also have feedback A, feedback B, much like we did with left and right feedback on the dual delay. And these are going to be very similar to every other delay. I've done a million videos about delays. The note sync or the time is going to be how long before we get our delayed repeats. Feedback is going to be how many repeats we're going to get. The pan controls are pretty self-explanatory. Feedback A and note sync A, once we've set those, we can decide where in the stereo spectrum we want to put it. Same with B. We have a master mix control. Now, this is where it differs a little bit from the dual delay. The dual delay gave us the ability to have independent left and right mix controls. So the note that's repeating on the left, we could have mixed a little bit lower. So that's nice control for that, but the CrissCross won't have that. There'll just be a master delay control. We have an output level, nothing crazy there. The crossfeed is what's interesting, and this is going to determine how much of each of these delay lines feeds back into the other. So we're going to look at that. This is going to be the really big difference between the old dual delay, which had no control over anything like that, and this CrissCross delay. We have headroom control, which is by default on 12, but this is if you find that a signal you're feeding into this is kind of causing it to clip a bit, you can just bring this up and get rid of it. We're just not going to really deal with that. We'll leave that up on 12. We have modulation that we can add to the delay line. We have a mod rate, mod depth, and we have the shape. We can either do a triangle or sine wave for the control of the modulation. We can also adjust the phase of the modulation for each delay line, so we can have them at 0 where they're working together 180 degrees so that they are completely inverted from one another, and that can give some interesting effects. So we'll leave that at 0 for now. We'll leave this on triangle. We also have bit depth, so we're actually borrowing a little bit, it would seem, from the vintage digital delay that we have on the Helix. We can change the bit depth from 6 bits all the way to 24 bits, and we can get some really grungy digital breakup and distortion out of this if we lower these down. We'll take a look at that in a minute. We also have low cut and high cut, which, I mean, really it's nothing special to this particular delay. We have that in the dual delay as well. We also have modulation in a dual delay and the ability to control the spread, which you're going to leave on 10 for now. Okay, so let's go back here. Let's first compare the two. Let's set this up so that I have a quarter note, on note sync A and a quarter note triplet on note sync B. And I'm going to do the same thing over here on the dual delay. I'm going to go feedback A and feedback B, both at 75%. Same thing over here. I'm going to go left and right feedback at 75%. Left mix and right mix at 50% on the dual delay. I'm going to keep the mix at 50%, but I'm going to pan these hard left and hard right, much like the dual delay would be. What we see here, the left side is going to be the quarter note, so we'd want to make it the same here. So left is the quarter note, is the note sync A, or the A delay line. Levels at 0. I'm going to keep the crossfeed at 0 for now, just so we can really hear what this crossfeed controls, because that's really the new control that's going to set this delay apart. We'll keep our headroom up. I'm just going to keep the modulation off for now, and bit depth and sample rate all the way up to 24-bit 48 kilohertz, so it's more pristine, much like what I would feel the dual delay would be like. And I'm going to turn the modulation off on this. So what happens here if we play a note with the CrissCross delays? It sounds like this. Now keep that in mind. I'm going to go over to the dual delay with these same settings, and I'm going to play the same note. Now, if you'll notice, I have trails off, so when I switch, we won't hear that kind of get in the way of the other delay we're trying to listen to. Let me go back and forth between this, and you'll hear that both of these have a very similar sound to them. Is there a subtle difference? Yeah, sure. So you might say, well, what's the point then? Well, the point isn't that we are trying to make them sound the same. The point is that we can have the CrissCross do some different things. So if we come back over to the CrissCross, now that we hear this, I'm going to bring the crossfeed all the way up to 10. Now listen to the difference. So we see that can be a very interesting control. It kind of has the delay lines feeding back, crossing all over the stereo spectrum, depending on where we have that set. Basically, with it off, it acts much like the dual delay. But as we move this, you'll hear some of them will collapse to the center. If we go up to 10, the different delay lines bounce around in the stereo spectrum. So we can get some very interesting effects by using that. Let's leave the crossfeed all the way up at 10 right now. Let's see what the modulation depth does on this. If I change that to sine wave. Change that rate. While we have these extreme settings, let's see what the phase button does on the modulation. So we have a lot of possibilities there with the shape, the phase, the modulation rate, and depth as well. So let's take that back out. Now let's listen to what the bit depth and sample rate does. So the sample rate being up at 48 kilohertz is going to be very pristine. As we bring that down, becomes much more lo-fi. Now let's bring that up to 48 kilohertz, but let's bring the bit depth way down. You'll hear right away, just by bringing the bit depth down, we introduce digital noise into our signal. Now I could also come up here and just set this to something a little different, more even, quarter note and eighth note. Right, bit depth back up. Very pristine. So we could set those somewhere in the middle as well if we want just a little bit more of a lo-fi sound. What we'll do is we'll bring that feedback back somewhat. And again, we could have long feedback on one side, shorter on the other. Or vice versa. For now, let's just bring those back maybe to around 50%. You could also play with the pan control so it's not so wide. Also bring this down to just collapse it more to a mono. But I really think the magic in this lies in having these pans. Maybe not so extreme, but I'm just for demonstration purposes, I'm doing that today. So one thing to keep in mind, when we do change the bit depth, sample rate, and whatnot, we are only affecting the repeated notes. We're not affecting our direct signal. Other than the obvious addition of that digital noise. Now, again, we could also keep that up nice and pristine, and we could bring high cuts in here as well to darken the sound up. You know, so there's lots of control over what we're capable of doing. You know, we could also just go much subtler on the modulation, maybe dirty things up just a bit. And there's some pretty interesting effects we can come up with the CrissCross delay. What do you guys think? That's a pretty interesting addition to an already nice palette of delay effects that we have in the Helix. Some folks might look at it and wonder, well, how is this really any different than a dual delay we've already had? But upon further investigation, we do notice there's some pretty interesting little controls in there, such as that crossfeed control that really allows us to tailor how the two delay lines are going to feed back into one another. And then the added bonus of being able to add some very effective modulation with a lot of tweakability, and also be able to control the bit depth and sample rate are wonderful additions. And this is another powerful tool to come up with some pretty creative ideas for our playing and for our composing. So I hope that that helps you to understand a little more what was going on with this delay. And I hope you find that useful. I hope it helps you to be able to dial something in very quickly and get you to your end goal much faster now. So thanks so much for watching. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some use out of watching it. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. Ciao for now.